Obi-Wan Kenobi once said to Anakin Skywalker, "This weapon is your life." You know, Anakin should have turned to him and said, "Well, it's cold, it's hard, and it's dangerous. Gosh, Obi-Wan, you really do know me, don't you?" Yeah. We've checked out these replica lightsabers, specifically the Anakin Skywalker Force FX Hasbro lightsaber with removable blade, in a previous visual showcase. We want to turn our attention, though, for this visual showcase for a brief review here that also deals with lightsabers, but we're not talking about lightsabers in physical replica form. We're talking about lightsabers in book form. We're talking about, Young Jedi Knights lightsabers. No, we're not talking about this one. We're talking about another of those many reuses of a Star Wars title, not this lightsabers, but the recently released Scholastic Star Wars Lightsabers, a guide to weapons of the Force, written by Pablo Hidalgo, though of course it doesn't say that anywhere on the cover here. This is one of those books that in recent memory a lot of people were trying to decide whether or not to buy, especially EU fans, because they weren't quite sure what to make of a book like this. It's a little oversized. I mean, you take a regular paperback book and it's much, much taller. It seems like it's going to be one of those thin books, and it is. Is it a guidebook? What is this thing? And how much should an EU reader be interested in picking this one up? That's what we're going to take a look at in this visual showcase. Hi everybody, I am Nathan P. Butler from the EU Review. Let's get to it. Now, Star Wars guidebooks have attempted to tackle the idea of lightsabers before. The Essential Guide to Weapons and Technology, which is one of the guides recently featured on the Visual Showcase number 9, where I went through and talked about the different Star Wars guides and their evolution as a series. It previously took a look at lightsabers in a 2-page spread on regular lightsabers, followed by a separate page focusing specifically on Exar Kun's lightsaber. This, of course, was published back around 1996, so well before double-bladed lightsabers made their appearance on film with Darth Maul. The only one they could use as an example was Exar Kun's. So it was tackled before as far as giving some background to what they are and how they work in guidebook form. The new Essential Guide to Weapons and Technology by Hayden Blackman, rather than Bill Smith this time around, did the same thing. Gave us our look at 3 different lightsabers here, Luke's, Darth Maul's, and Asajj Ventress's. Gave us a breakdown down here at the bottom, if you can see it, of Luke's lightsaber with information there. And then on a second page, gave us more information, and on the facing page, breakdowns, again, of Darth Vader's lightsaber, Darth Maul's, and Asajj Ventress's. So again, the new Essential Guide to Weapons of Technology also took a look at lightsabers. And for more in-depth background on lightsaber forms, styles, and things like that, the background of them, the history of them, we have Jedi vs. Sith, the Essential Guide to the Force, which starts talking about lightsabers in the chapter called The Jedi, right around page 94, and goes on for quite a few pages throughout that chapter talking about lightsabers, starting with some awesome artwork in here by Chris Travas. It's basically a guide to the Force and a guide to the Jedi, and in doing so, you have to have a guide to lightsabers. It's all part and parcel with the mission of this particular book. So from an EU standpoint, we've gotten a lot of background on lightsabers before. So just what in the heck are they trying to do with this book, and how does it fit into the grand scheme of Star Wars resources out there? Now, first of all, this book, Star Wars Lightsabers, only runs about 70 pages. It is taller than a standard paperback, a little bit wider than a standard paperback. You start out in here with information on just the background and the history of the lightsaber. You have an awesome cutaway here of the insides of a lightsaber, which is one of the better images I've ever seen of that type of cutaway. Information on building a lightsaber, information about taking care of it, and then you get into profiles of individual people. In the back, since we're going to focus on the individual people as our main focus here, you also have information on lightsaber techniques, myth versus fact. You have information here on lightsaber combat, the different forms and so forth, where to aim when you're in combat. And the last few pages really kind of feel like a duh. It's a focus on notable lightsaber duels. So basically, every time you see a main lightsaber duel in the films, including where we see Qui-Gon battling Darth Maul for a few seconds on Tatooine, those get included in there as a special featured duel. Not exactly the most amazing features in that sense so far, because all that information is stuff we've seen plenty of times before. It's much more like that information was compiled and brought into this guide than it was anything created specifically for this guide, except for some of the images that go with it. And those, again, kind of few and far between, like that awesome lightsaber cutaway. Most of the book, though, is a guide to lightsabers themselves. So, for instance, you have Qui-Gon Jinn, and it shows his lightsaber here. Then you have the next page, it's Yoda with his lightsaber. Then Darth Maul. We'll come back to Darth Maul in a moment. Notice his lightsaber is not on this side. We have Mace Windu with his, and so forth. Anakin Skywalker, the one that he had that got destroyed on Geonosis, that looks a lot like his mainstream one in most respects here. We keep going and going. General Grievous, Aayla Secura. But you notice here that of all these characters and all these lightsabers that you're seeing as I flip through this, these are not lightsabers from the expanded universe. All of this is information from lightsabers as presented in the films, right down to almost replica-sized images of them. This replica is supposedly somewhat life-size. I'm not sure exactly if it really is a 1-to-1 ratio here, but when it comes to lightsabers in this book, you might think that what you're looking at might possibly be, perhaps, life-size. Here's the saber used by Anakin and then used by Luke. Here's the replica. You can already tell the replica is bigger than the one, if I can get lined up here, bigger than the one that's here in the book. Now the book calls it 28 centimeters. It is not 28 centimeters in the book. Same thing goes for Mace Windu's. Says it's 28 centimeters, I think it is. Actually measures more around 22. So they're close to lifelike, close to 1-to-1 ratios, but these are not life-size, at least based on what you're seeing. Centimeters, it gives the measurements, but then you actually go through and measure the images. They're not exact. So this is not 1-to-1. They're just close-ups of the individual lightsabers. So what information does it give us for the individual lightsabers? Well, let's take Count Dooku's here as an example. It tells us the hilt length. It shows us an image of it. It tells the hilt length, the hilt width, the material it's made from, the blade color, and what the focusing crystal is. In this case, a synthetic Sith crystal. It gives us an image of the character with the lightsaber generally, and a little thing underneath that says notes that has some background. This is where you start to see some EU material get in there. For example, when talking about Aayla Secura, it talks about her background with Quinlan Vos, which is initially EU stuff, now apparently being worked into the Clone Wars cartoon series. For example, when you check out things like General Grievous. General Grievous's lightsabers tell you where the 4 lightsabers he's using in Revenge of the Sith come from, some of which came from other film characters that he killed off-screen in the EU instead of on film. And it does tell you about that. For instance, is it Adi Gallia, I believe it is? They show hers and point out that it was taken on Boz Pitti, or Stas Ali, or whoever it was that got killed to give him that particular lightsaber. So, in that sense, they are tying it into the EU, but again, it's only in a very tangential sort of way, not in any big way to add a lot of information to the EU when it comes to this book. If you also look on the back, it says, along with all the other information here, it says, learn the stats and stories behind 25 of the most notable lightsabers in the 10 most famous duels in Jedi history. And down here, key pages fold out to make the action bigger and closer. Well, these key pages are 3 times, 4 pages, but 3 specific times. For example, with all these different characters, you have their lightsabers across from the page on which the character appears. For Darth Maul, as I mentioned a moment ago, we'd come back to, Darth Maul's doesn't show his because it's so long. You have to actually fold it out and get his lightsaber. Again, it's not necessarily 1-to-1 with real life, but it folds out to give you the sense of, wow, this is a lot longer than the scale used for all these other ones. Then you have, midway through the book, General Grievous featured, and this one folds out on both sides to give you all 4 of the lightsabers he uses in the films, and as I said, where they get them. Again, Adi Gallia, not Stas Ali, Adi Gallia, her lightsaber, mentioning Boz Pitti down there, Pablo Gil, Roran Korab, from the Genndy Tartakovsky series up there on what to you is the top right-hand side of the screen there. and then Shaak Ti underneath. Those two, really kind of cool fold-outs. They didn't really need to make those fold-outs. They could have just made the scale smaller, but they're nifty to have in there. Unfortunately, the last one kind of makes you wonder if they were just running out of ideas. It's with Luke Skywalker from Return of the Jedi. Folded up, it's just images of Luke using a lightsaber. Not even that lightsaber. Only the bottom two of those images are from Return of the Jedi with that lightsaber. All the other ones, the other 4 of them, are using the one he got through Obi-Wan from Anakin, from Revenge of the Sith. So it really kind of feels like that third fold-out is kind of useless just to give him another fold-out page to put in here. So, generally speaking, is it worth picking up? The price tag on this is $8.99 up here in the corner. And because this is such a cheap item, not cheap in quality, but cheap in terms of price, relatively speaking, compared to other stuff, you're not going to find it discounted most places. Amazon.com at this moment still has this $8.99 item as $8.99. So for $9, is it worth it? Well, let me put it this way. It's a book that sets out to do one thing: detail the lightsabers of the Star Wars films. In that sense, it does a very good job, because all these different characters like Plo Koon and such that show up in the films with lightsabers, you see their lightsabers based on the props, you get a little background on it, and you see who each lightsaber goes with. So if you're someone who is into custom making lightsabers, if you're really into lightsaber hilts in general, perhaps costuming, this is an awesome book to get. If you just wanted to see the lightsabers up close for all these different characters, great book to get. But that's all it's trying to do, and it accomplishes that, but does really no more. There is nothing in here from, say, the Clone Wars cartoon series. You won't get to see what Ahsoka's lightsaber looks like, for example. There is nothing in here from the EU, beyond little side mentions. There are no EU-only characters with their EU lightsabers. Basically, if there wasn't a lightsaber prop for them to use to create this image here, they didn't do anything with the lightsabers whatsoever. So it might be better to say, perhaps, Star Wars lightsabers, instead of a guide to the weapons of the Force, perhaps a guide to the weapons of the films, or a guide to the weapons seen in the Star Wars films, or a guide to the iconic blades used in the Star Wars films, something like that to denote Star Wars films, not EU, not the Clone Wars. Given the fact that most places where you can order this, you're only going to see the cover, I find that a little bit distressing. Not that they're trying to purport this to be anything else than it really is, but the fact that people could very easily look at this and think it's going to be something that it's not. Think it's going to cover more than just the lightsabers of the films. I gotta be honest, when this showed up in my mailbox through Amazon, I was kind of disappointed about what it wound up being compared to what I had hoped that it was. However, taking a second look at it in light of what they tried to do versus what actually happened, they accomplished their initial mission. It's just maybe not the type of mission that I would have purposely pursued if I had known quite what this was when I was going through and buying it on Amazon. So, if you're into costuming, into the films themselves, into lightsabers, it's a good buy. It's $8.99. It is a little bit more than a standard paperback novel is concerned. If you're into the EU, there's not much new information you're going to find here, and if you're looking for EU information in a guidebook, you might as well skip it, because quite frankly, you're not going to get much new out of it. For what it does it well. It just doesn't do a whole heck of a lot. So my recommendation, I'm just going to have to say medium, because it depends. High for collectors or high for people who are into costuming and such, but low, relatively speaking, for EU fans. We'll average that out and simply say medium on this one. Not a great buy, but at the same time not a very expensive buy, so it's not going to be something you're going to be kicking yourself for quite as much as some other things if you were to buy it and then find it's not quite your cup of tea. And shit, my lightsaber fell on the floor. Oh, that's not good. Poor lightsaber. It don't fall on the floor. Yeah, anyway.